Welcome to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and I'm going to introduce you to the creators who give fear its voice. Together, we'll explore the strange, the unsettling, and the unforgettable. So go ahead and dim those lights because that conversation starts now. Welcome back to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton. Today I am joined by none other than Jeff Vande Zande, who has been here with me before, but this time he is back to talk to me about his new book, Blood of the Witness Tree, which is a sequel to a book that I absolutely love. I think it's a sequel, but it's a follow-up, we'll put it that way, to a book that I absolutely loved. And so I'm very excited to talk to him today. So Van, as I tend to call you, welcome back to the show. I'm
Thanks for
very happy to
having
have you.
Thanks for having me back.
Of
And
course.
I mean, part of the connection too is not only that you had me on the show before, but there are some Rick Clifton words on the back of this new book because you wrote a wonderful blurb for me, and I really appreciate that. And it seemed like you were excited about the second book as well. But I'll be curious. I'll be asking you some questions as well, but in terms of your feelings about quality of each book. You know, as far as is it a worthwhile sequel? Obviously, you wrote a blurb for it, so you must think so. But it's been an interesting ride. I've never written a follow up or a sequel book. This is Blood of the Witness Tree is my seventh novel, but the first were literary with one dystopian, and then just recently got into the horror genre.
Well, I love it, and like I said, I was floored when you asked for the blurb, and I was like, I would absolutely love to do the blurb. And then when I read the book, I was like, oh wow, I couldn't like I think it was the longest blurb. I was like, you're gonna have to trim this down because like I've written you a novel of a blurb. You're gonna have to just sort of trim it down and make it work. So I was like, I don't know where to go out on this thing because there was so many great little moments that I really enjoyed. So
Oh, great. Great. Yeah, and I had a really nice blurb too from, and I don't know if, have you heard of Matthias Clausen? I guess
no.
he's based in Europe, but professor, and he is, I'd like to know more about, he's the co-director of the Recreational Fear Lab.
I saw that.
Yeah,
So
but he
I
wrote
want to visit.
yeah, and well, it sounds like that's his scholarship because he also wrote Why Horror Seduces. So I don't know that he writes horror so much as studies horror, but his blurb worked out really well because he managed to kind of blend a synopsis with a blurb, so I didn't have to write a separate kind of synopsis for the back. So all the blurbs were great, but I mean yours outshines them all.
Well, I appreciate that. Speaking of synopsis, let's start with probably the hardest question you have to do today. Tell us what this book is about.
Well, I can tell you first when it's about. It does take place around a decade after the end of The Dance of Rotten Sticks, the first book. I think my literary realism gets in there in terms of character development. Isaac is farther along, still doing well, still not drinking. Most likely, it doesn't get into it very much in the book, but he's retired and he is probably struggling the most with Emily, his youngest daughter, who is really exhibiting a lot of social anxiety and kind of, as he calls it in the book, failure to launch. You know, he's not quite sure what to do with this daughter who doesn't seem to be leaving the house, even though she's almost 22 years old, and also worried about what impact that might be having on Carson, his youngest. And so he does get the idea. It's like, okay, this kid deserves some one-on-one time with his dad. So that's kind of the whole premise, is he's going to take his son up to the Pigeon River Forest in Michigan, where I frequently fly fish, and I hope that comes across in the reading, that the location itself is almost a character, because that's
It absolutely does. It was actually one of my next questions for you was to talk about the setting of Pigeon River Forest and like how does that hold like a personal meaning for you and how does it shape sort of how you tell your stories or in particular this story? Because I know the other story had some personal the location had some personal meaning for you as well, right?
This one probably even more so. The personal connection with the first one was definitely the alcoholism that I 4 years sober now this past April, and I had my own struggles, and so the personal connection with Blood of the Witness Tree is definitely the location. Because I've been fly fishing in the Pigeon River Forest. Well, I'm 55, and I've been going up there since I was about 28 every summer. Usually one fishing trip every month for May, June, July, and August. A buddy of mine and I will
Great.
go for 2 or 3 days, and it's great fishing. Really, like it, and that comes out in the book too. It has the Pigeon River Forest has Michigan's only elk herd, and actually have been seeing. That's been fun too. Over the past few summers, we've been actually seeing more elk. We're not really going to elk viewing areas. We're out on the rivers, but sometimes seeing them when you're out fishing, this 800-pound animal comes through the woods to get a drink out of the river. It's not horrifying. It's you're awestruck by the size of it.
I think it would be a little majestic a little bit maybe.
Oh, absolutely. But also I've had not although there is a scene and it's taken from an experience. Quite a few of the experiences are taken from experiences that I had. I have woken up in my tent and had a funnel weaver spider right above my head
Nope.
in the night had come in and made his little
Nope.
nest. I don't know why he thought there were going to be a lot of bugs in my tent, but that we have had we had a elk come up out of a meadow that had a brain worm.
Mm.
So it had gone blind. The rest of the herd had abandoned it. And our neighbor was running a generator. And that's what the rangers suspected why the elk came up into our campground, as it was following the noise of the generator because it couldn't see anymore. And it was very sad, stumbling around the campsite, and that they had to put that down. Another, oh, the baby stroller. That actually happened to us. Except
I think you told me this, yes.
it's not like in the book where it's just down the trail. This baby stroller was a good mile into the woods, maybe half mile, but it was far from like any road. We were walking and we're just looking like, what is that? And we
It's
go up,
so random.
and
I love it.
it's like this not abandoned, like covered in rainwater, right? Like looked like a more or less brand new baby stroller. Like just like in the book, there were snacks down in the lower compartment. And that one kind of spooked us as far as like should we be going to the local police? Like what's going on here that there's this baby stroller? There's no explanation as to why it's just in the middle of the forest on a trail, other than, they maybe decided these wheels are too small for pushing down but who abandons what's probably $150 baby stroller and doesn't come back for it?
I
But
mean, I kept expecting something too, and like it's just so random to just be there. So, and
right,
I remember we were talking when you first sent this over, and you had told me that that had actually happened, and that was
yeah,
a real thing that happened, and I was like,
right.
that is just so random and creepy, and I kind of love that you included it. So,
It, yeah, Blood of the Witness Tree has a lot more verisimilitude when it comes to location, where Dance of Rotten Sticks, that is a fictional island and it's a fictional lake, even though it's surrounded by nonfiction. There's Mullet Lake and Burt Lake and whatnot. Those are real lakes up near Sheboygan, but there's no inland lake with an island like that in the middle of it that I'm aware of, not at least not in that area. So that I made up because an island location was necessary for the first book.
And if I remember correctly, in the first book too, though, a lot of there was some fly fishing in that one as well, and a lot of those there's something I don't remember the details of it. I have to go back and look, but there's something in that story that had happened to you before, and you wrote it into it, and it was one of my more favorite moments, I think, in the story that happened in the lake. Something happened in the lake. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, the one that I remember for sure was I have had the experience of being dive bombed by cedar waxwings.
That's it.
Yeah,
I was gonna say I thought it was birds or something, but you were
yeah.
in the water, right? I think you were in the water.
I was on shore, but I was trying to go through the tag alder, which is this thick kind of growth that you get on either side of a lot of Michigan rivers. And I was trying to but they had their nests in the tag alder. So
Mm.
these little birds, and at first I was like, wow, the birds are making a lot of noise. And I kind of looked up and they're like coming, like, and they're just trying to drive me away from the nest. And I'm like, I'm just trying to get to the river, guys. If you let me, we don't have to bother each other. But I do
Exactly.
remember taking my fly rod almost like a foil. And I was like Three Musketeering these cedar
Yeah.
waxwings.
That's funny. That's funny. Well, let's talk a little bit about the characters in this book, specifically the family dynamic. I think for me is the one that I mean, obviously that stood out, and it stood out from the first book as well. But I want to sort of talk like the fact that Isaac's really kind of doing everything he can to kind of hold things together. They're dealing with a lot of sort of what's going on, and you did this. I was as I was reading through it, I thought about how well you did this in the first book as well. That horror was so tightly wound into sort of the emotional life of the family itself. It's just sort of tied in a way, and it just makes them I'm going to use this word intentionally, it makes them perfect vessels for the supernatural in your story. So I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about balancing a lot of that emotional realism along with the horror, and how you get both of those to land with equal weight, because I feel like you do that very, very well.
I would say it goes back to when I was, attempting to write the great American novel, the literary, I've got four novels: Into the Desperate Country, Landscape with Fragmented Figures, Detroit Muscle, and American Poet, all under the pen name, just under Jeff Vande Zande. And they are all literary. And with that, you're kind of stuck with emotion and human dynamic and whatnot. So I think it's just that older writing form is ingrained in me when it comes to creating characters. So I think that's just that literary aspect of me. And then I think the ever-present fear is there going to be enough horror in this thing. I do believe that the second book is a little bit more horrific than the first book.
I don't know that I wouldn't disagree with that. It does different things, but I think sort of for me, yeah, I would agree with that. I think the first book was really about what Isaac was going through and dealing with at the time, and then what's happening to his daughter. I don't want to give things away. I'm going to try and talk spoiler free, so I'm going to be a little vague. But what was happening with his daughter in the first book, and his brother and everything around him that was going on carried a very heavy emotional toll. And while this book had its emotional moments as well, there's a lot more of the supernatural that's coming at them. And I think, and well, for me anyway, it made sense, right? Because I feel like they've opened that door.
Right.
Which is why I go back to using that word vessel, because I thought it was a very intentional word for me, because they've opened the door to that. So a lot more is coming at them. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was not only struggling with his alcoholism, but then with the mother-in-law wanting to take the children from
Yep.
him as well. There's so that same kind of thing is not happening. I think a lot in the second book is much more internal for him. And I think he doesn't even realize it till the kids lay it on him at the end when they're like, Dad, you're not going to be alone. That's I think it's a big fear he's really carrying and never fully addresses explicitly throughout the book. All his fears about, even how he's being kind of counterintuitive with he wants he wants Emily in theory to move out, and yet all of his advice for her is like, oh, apartments are overrated. Why would you want to waste your money? You're
Yep.
not ready. You're going to come back with your tail between your legs. And I wonder if some
Doing
of
the
that.
absolute least he can to get her to move out.
Right,
But yeah,
right.
I get it.
So,
Great.
so I do think he has that kind of fear, but I definitely want to, as I talked with you about the first time we spoke, my fear was the books would be too literary for horror readers and too horror for literary readers. And the feedback I'm getting from people is they appreciate that kind of intense character development, and doing as much as I can to make them as real people as possible.
I would agree with that. I think I can't speak from the too horror for literary folks, but I can certainly speak to it being too literary for horror folks. I love that. And I think that, we crave that. And I think that's what makes a great story, whether it has a horror vibe to it or not, is really about the characterization, right? And it's with anything. It's not just a book, it's with a film, it's with a TV show. I mean, if you can't relate to that character, if there's nothing about that character that touches you or reaches you in some way, then you're just not invested in the story. And so yeah.
It's like with King's Christine, the kid.
Uh-huh.
I think most people digging a horror film or a King fan see themselves in Arnie, right? They're trying to fit in high school, and in some ways just trying to be invisible. Just leave
Yep.
me, like, don't pick on me, just let me sit in the corner and read my horror book. And that scene, that very terrifying scene in the almost, I mean, Buddy Repperton to me is as terrifying as what's happening with the car and everything. He's everybody's worst nightmare bully. He looks like John Travolta on steroids. And he's like terrible. He's got the butterfly knife or the switchblade. And he's like stabbing Arnie's lunch, and his milk carton is spilling everywhere. But I think a lot of people, we understand Arnie's desire too for just some power, right? Some
Yep.
agency in a world that treats him like, even if he's lucky enough to have the kind of cooler friend who kind of feels sorry for him in the end, and that you don't want a friendship based on somebody feeling sorry for you either. So you almost kind of understand when he's making that turn, that's coming from his character. When he's ripe for Christine to possess, because he's so possessible. He's so craving the power that she is going to give him too. I'm just assuming everybody that would be listening has seen Christine, but I think that, for me, spending that time developing Arnie is the same thing I want to do. I want the audience to understand what are the internal conflicts that are driving the external that happens with the horror.
Well, and to that point, let's talk a lot a bit about Emily. So I like Isaac, but I think Emily is probably one of my favorite characters just because she has a very deep history. She's a very fascinating character to me. And I think we talked a little bit about this in the last interview too. I'm always, one of the reasons why I was like, oh, I hope you do a sequel to The Dance of the Rotten Sticks is because I want to know what happens to her. Like, she's been through this thing, and I kind of like, that's always been the fascinating part for me. I go back to Jamie Lee Curtis from the Halloween movies and seeing what's happened to Laurie Strode, right? And seeing her 30 years after those events and stuff. And I just become fascinated by that. So I was very excited to sort of see where Emily ends up in this story. And I'd love to have you sort of talk about your approach to her and sort of what you were going to take her through.
One of the things I wish I did, it seems like Emily always ends up unconscious about halfway through the book. And then is not a character, really. I think one of the things I really enjoyed doing with her too was exploring her love relationship with Harper. And I think those two are good for each other. I'm glad that Emily found Harper. I think Emily's still struggling. Emily is carrying, obviously. And I'm trying to avoid my own spoilers, but you got to talk about the book. But I mean, she's carrying some of Evelyn, the antagonist of the first book, in her, to the point that I think not only was she receptive to having powers herself, but they are intensified because she has this trapped portion of Evelyn in her that she can kind of draw from as well. So I liked exploring that. There's a lore to how the covens and witches operate within my books that I know, but I keep a lot of it to myself. I don't like necessarily long expositional passages where characters are talking about how the world works, but realistically they wouldn't be having that conversation because they already know. So it's clearly just a conversation for the audience, which for me always takes me out of the book. I think
I agree. Too much exposition can ruin a great sort of tense moment for sure. And I'm glad that you don't do that. But I love that you have this mythology down. You have the lore. You have all of that.
Both of my own children in their own way, as I don't know, I don't even think this is an admission because I think it's becoming universal, is just like having anxiety. It's an anxiety inducing world that we live in, and it's only getting more so. I'm surprised when anybody buys the book and tells me they read it, because I struggle myself just trying to finish a book. I feel my not writing it, I mean just reading one for pleasure. It feels like if I sit down and have a 10-page reading session, that's a pretty good session. It's hard to find that ability to concentrate. So I did want to deal with, though, as a father and having children who have experienced anxiety, and as a man very much like Isaac, driven by logic, where I'm just like, but you have nothing to be anxious about, so stop it. That's not helpful to somebody dealing with anxiety, as I have learned. But you don't know what to do with it because you almost wish your child had a broken arm instead, so you could just bring them to the hospital and you could do something. But instead you feel useless. So sometimes you almost answer it with this super unproductive kind of frustration and anger. So I think if in the first book I took on my own alcoholism, in the second book I am taking on, to some extent, like just dealing with a child who is experiencing social anxiety and debilitating anxiety. I think I'm anxious too, but I'm not debilitated by it. I'm just miserable by it, but I'm not debilitated. I go do my job and all the things. But I've seen children through marriages too, and stepchildren and whatnot, like leaving you in bed, unable to get out of bed anxiety. And it's as Isaac experiences in the book, it's really frustrating, but I think it's more frustrating because of the uselessness you feel. Like you really want to do something for your child and you can't. And there are no quick fixes. And even, going to the doctor and the pharmacist and that can be a long road of experimentation too, as far as finding the right balance of antidepressants or whatever. There's no quick fix. It's not like an antibiotic even, where it's like, oh, you got an earache, oh, you got a bacterial infection, we're going to already start seeing you getting better tomorrow when we give you this erythromycin or whatever tonight. That just is not the case with anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I really admire in your writing, in both books here, is how grounded it is in the reality of it, because you do spend some time in this book sort of addressing, or Isaac spends some time, I should say, addressing sort of that feeling of hopelessness or uselessness, I guess, of him not knowing what to do with that anxiety and how to help, and his frustrations with that. And that all feels very real. But then, you've got a way of just weaving in this reality in the middle of all of this sort of, like, it's the ordinary, I guess, versus the uncanny, if you will, this sort of reality in the middle of all of the super reality that's happening. And I think this is more of a craft question, but talk about how you sort of approach sort of balancing on that. Like, how do you sort of balance that? Do you keep like a track, like, I want to keep sort of this through line while this is happening? I mean, so it's really more about craft and how you tend to write that way and keep it all balanced so well together. The normal rubbing up against the supernatural, I guess, if you will.
and I don't, I've heard writers in interviews who are able to talk about exactly how they do what they do. There's a degree of luck to your question and my execution of it. I do know though, before going in, like even with Blood of the Witness Tree, I had like a scary events chart. Like for me, it's like, what is going to happen that keeps the horror moving too? Because I know I can do the anxiety stuff. I know I can do the fatherhood stuff, but this is, I don't know if Blood of the Witness Tree is a gothic horror or contemporary. I'm calling it more of a folk horror just because of the emphasis on the woods. But I know that it is the kind of the frightening moments, just like if you're, with your familiarity with film and how we talk about a screenplay, like the inciting incident, plot point 1, midpoint, plot point 2, the various ways, however books choose to talk about them, there are these touchstone moments that provide the spine to the story that are necessary, be it in a film, but I've even found that I feel those moments are necessary in a novel too. I do think sometimes, what did my dad was an English professor, and he always said this: most writers start out wanting to be a poet, failing that, turn to the short story, failing that, turn to the novel, because it just gives you more space. I think the bigger your space is, I don't know exactly the point I'm making, but I'm coming back to the idea that my teaching and learning about screenplays has made me, I feel, a better novelist in terms of making sure that there's also a plot, a significant plot, that because I think most readers, as much as we are like, oh, it's all character development. If you ask a reader, hey, oh, I'm reading this really cool book, they're going to be like, they're going to say, what's it about? And what they really mean is what happens in it. Like, it's the plot.
Yeah. Well,
And
there's plot points. Yep.
and I think keeping that in mind. So I did have like these structural horror plot points. And I did, as I was writing, addressing that, like, okay, we've been in the domestic long enough. Like, even there's the scene, and I called it the bridge scene in Blood of the Witness Tree, where I try to create a bridge between the first book and this book, making sure that nobody would have to read the first book to enjoy Blood of the Witness Tree. So it's when he reflects on everything that happened. He's down in the basement. His daughter has a pizza delivery person at the door, so he can just sit for a little bit in quiet and think about what they went through. But through that, just to keep the mystery going, I had the little thing going on with the moth kind of bumping against the glass, and he's vaguely aware that there's this moth that he wants to let out. He even kind of romanticizes the idea, oh, I could go up and get Emily, and we could put a cup over the moth and we could let it go together, and that could be a moment that we share. But he's so lost in the past by the end. It's not a huge horrific moment, but I knew that chapter was going to end with the moth caught in a spider web. And almost again, like classic Isaac, bad things happen when he fails to pay attention. When he's kind of like one of the least perceptive characters. I know readers get frustrated with him, like how would this guy ever bring his children back to the woods? How would he think that's a good idea? It's like, hey, let's go on a fly fishing trip where we're isolated and we have no phone signal. Because he is, I mean, in the first book, I at least could write it off that he was, drunk a lot of the time, but he really is not super perceptive. But I do too wonder, is to some extent, is that also being manipulated? There is a lot that goes on with the antagonist being able to kind of get into people's heads, plant ideas that they think are their own ideas, but they're not. And I'm losing thread of the question though, but you were asking about how do I weave those? And I think that's just, some of it is happening through osmosis of just my teaching of screenwriting, really kind of making me think about my novels differently with kind of these important kind of skeletal plot points that that give the story a spine that holds it together so it doesn't, I don't know, wander off and be plotless and uninteresting.
Well, I love that, and I think that's probably the same answer to the next question I was about to ask. But I was going to talk about, like, there are a couple of different sort of threads, I guess, if you will, happening in the story with different storylines with different people, and it all tends to kind of converge more so in this book than in the first book. And I just was wondering, like, how you sort of did those just kind of. There's some people that like Nate and these guys that we meet throughout the story, and at some point they all tend to converge. I'm wondering if that was a happy accident or if that was planned from the beginning. And again, that's probably more a craft question than anything.
I would say planned and serendipity in that, like, you
Happy
realize,
accident.
yeah, and there's a lot of like writing that first draft, but then I don't even consider the first draft writing. It's just the slog. You're just, I think of it more as like a potter putting their clay on the wheel,
Yep.
and it looks nothing like a pot, and yet you can't make a pot without that slop of clay on the wheel. It needs it. It has to be ugly before it can be pretty, and nobody accidentally throws clay on a potter's wheel and looks and like, oh my god, it's already a pot.
Exactly.
How fortunate. And so, yeah, I knew I wanted it to start more kind of interesting in the woods, and that's where you do get that kind of odd opening chapter that's from Nate's point of view, and it's almost kind of a flash forward, really, about this storm that eventually Isaac and Carson will experience. But I really enjoyed writing that, and that is part of my process. I rewrote before I wrote anything else. I rewrote that first chapter probably 15 or 16 times
Oh, wow.
because I want it to be perfect. So when I'm ever having doubts about the other points in the book, I can say, no, I got to push through this because that opening chapter deserves to exist.
I love that.
Because it's, and so it always, like, even if I'm getting stuck and like, oh man, this is tough, or this is kind of a plot hole and I'm going to have to deal with it later, and God, that's sloppy. Sometimes I'll go back and just reread the first chapter that I wrote and be like, no, I got to get through that because this doesn't exist without the rest of the book. So it's almost like it's just my inspiration. Like, eventually I can get the rest of the book to sound like this.
Well, I've had moments like that in my own writing where, especially the serendipitous ones, where it's more, I don't know if serendipity plays into it or if it's just me like, well, I wonder what would happen if I mix this with this, and like, let's see if it blows up and goes in a great direction. And I've had some great success with just trying stuff like that, and a lot of, I'll call them happy accidents of just trying to marry certain storylines together, and suddenly it just works and it takes it in a completely different place. So I'm always fascinated to know when other people write how they get to certain things and certain twists and things like that. So,
well, there was a scene when I first wrote it that when after the storm happens, and you'll know why I couldn't do this, but after the storm happens, he gets back on the horn and he's talking to Ranger Strang, and then I realized Strang can't be there. He can't be talking to him. And so he eventually, I choose a different ranger. But originally in the first version of that chapter 2, if you'll recall, in this first chapter that's published, Nate looks into the woods and he sees a creature kind of running at high speed deeper into the woods. And he's like, I can't place, it's not an elk. It can't be an elk. And yet it's too big to be a deer. So, and he later thinks, I'll have to talk to Ranger Strang about what that might be. But that addition of something running through the woods came much later. It was not in the original, even after the 16 rewrites of the first chapter, it still wasn't in there. So yeah, it's a matter of, and I think I even allude to Luke, where the ranger that he talks to says something about Dietrich and Luke are already at the town corner lake, but I can't get a hold of them. But so yeah, I knew that they would play a part. I knew, and partly as a horror writer, you got to have some people that are expendable, right?
That's exactly right.
You got to have your red shirt
Yep.
Star Trek crew members. Right?
Exactly, the red shirts. So, to that point, I have to ask, is there a favorite moment or scene that you are excited for readers to experience? And if you remember before you answer that, I'm going to tell you mine. And you already know what it is because I think we've already talked about it before. I mean, there are a lot of great moments. That creature running through the woods is one of them. But for me, it is when Isaac goes into the root cellar. It is literally the moment when I put it down and I was like, what the hell are you doing? We don't do that. so that was kind of a really cool moment for me. That's all I'm going to say about it because it happens very late in the story, and anything further would be a spoiler. But we'll just leave it at that.
I'm not, just to not have to think about it, I'm not picking your answer, but that is one of my favorite chapters. That whole sequence with the log cabin. Because it was an addition. I had written the whole book. And then there was a complaint that a reviewer had noted in Dance of the Rotten Sticks. And that's a valid complaint, but I can't do anything about it. And their complaint was, why don't you have any scenes inside the orphanage on the island? Because there's scenes outside of it, but it seems like it would be really like a missed opportunity that you didn't go into that. And it's like, well, blah, blah. But in your head, you're thinking, shut up. Why are you so much smarter than I am? Like, why didn't I think of that? But the same thing I realized in Blood of the Witness Tree, everything took place outdoors. And I was like, no, I need the spooky cabin in the woods kind of thing. That chapter has been the chat I've done this past October. Obviously, October is good to horror writers. And so I had probably 7 or 8 events throughout October at various libraries. University of Michigan Flint had me, just different events. And at every one, that's the chapter I read.
I love it.
Partly because it's an insert craft-wise. It doesn't give away, even though it's chapter 15, I don't have to explain a lot to bring a listener up to speed. A little bit about why they're in the woods, a little bit about why, when he comes to, his family is all still kind of unconscious around him. But other than that, I can kind of just dive right in, read it. There's not a lot to explain in the and I really loved writing it, and I wasn't sure that I would. But another thing that I realized, and this was just serendipity too, is what down in the root cellar, when he eventually has to do what I could not do, which is get down on hands and knees and then start going into that tunnel.
It just got progressively worse. And I was like, dude, turn around. What are we doing?
When I describe it, I'm freaking myself out. When I describe the water wicking up from the tunnel, his knees, but one of the things I realized serendipitously again is it echoed his experience when he was in the tent, thinking about making himself claustrophobic just because his marijuana-addled mind at the time, after his daughter's brilliant suggestion, just take an edible. That'll help you sleep.
Yeah, that always works.
That's a real experience I have had, because probably being in my 50s, I think about there might come a time where I have to have an MRI, and the idea of an MRI machine terrifies me. Just sliding into the tube and your face is that far away. And yet you can't say no, because they're searching your body. Even that's terrible, because they're searching your body for disease. It's just like, I don't want to know, really. I don't want to do this, and I don't want to know what you find. But I will do that. I'll be out camping. It's like my partner and I, he's in his tent. We're done for the day. Little crackle coming off the fire. But for the most part, you're just alone with your thoughts in a tent. You can't distract yourself with your phone because there's no internet. And that's where my brain will start to go, because I'm in the sleeping bag, my hand, and I start to think about claustrophobia. And then my mind will start to be like, you're going to have an MRI someday. You know that, right? And I'll panic myself. I have had to get out of my sleeping bag and walk around a pitch black campsite just to clear, to get out of that frame of mind. So that was fun. And I just like that how his experience in the tunnel echoed his earlier experience when he was in his tent. So yeah, sometimes I think you leave gifts to yourself as a writer and you don't even realize it until a third or fourth or fifth revision and be like, oh my God, why don't I could take that and this becomes this. And yeah, I can talk excitedly about the book right now because I'm done with it. A book I cannot talk excitedly about because it's frustrating me already is the third book. I am working on a third book.
That was my next question for you. Like, what is next with our favorite family here? I want to know. So is the third book related?
It is not it's related. It is not a full decade because there's a thing with 11s, right? Like Emily was 11. Now she's in Blood of the Witness Tree. She's going to be turning 22 years old. So there's something about that. This does not have that. And I'm changing the story becomes Carson's story. He's 21 years old when the story opens. He's 15 in Blood of the Witness Tree. He's 21. I'm about 1,000 words into it, just limping along. But he's down in Detroit. He's attending and failing most of his classes at Wayne State. He is waking up with a hangover. So he has kind of in his needing to drown out his past experiences. One of the things I can tell you, the opening line is his dead mother had not tried to communicate with him in years. Oh. And so the third book is going to do a lot more with his being, I think, clairaudient or something, that he can hear the dead.
Wow.
Yeah, which is hinted at even more than hinted at in the first two books. Yeah. But since it's going to be from his point of view, there's going to be a lot more of how he contends with that. So, and I have ideas where it's going. I have ideas of characters who are no longer going to be in the book, be a part of the story even. But yes, this is going to be Carson's story to tell. His sisters will definitely factor into it, but not everybody.
Don't answer this question, but the first person I thought of when you said clairaudient, and I don't know if that's the word, but I'm gonna say yes, it is, was Evelyn. Don't answer.
Okay. All
right. So, like, that would be very interesting to me. But don't answer. I don't want to know.
All right. I do have, and I always need a title just to know it's there, even if it ends up getting changed. Blood of the Witness Tree was Shadows of the Witness Tree for a long time. And I just think Blood is better. Blood partly because how much family plays into it. Not just Isaac's family, but Evelyn's family and everybody connected to that side of the story too. And literally blood around the witness tree, etc. The third book is going to be called The Orphan Ward.
Oh, does that mean
but a little bit of a play on the word ward, because a ward is also a protective spell.
Yep.
In addition to being, whatever, a ward or a wing of a building or whatnot. But I played with the idea of like Return to Orphan Island, but that just, I don't know, that the return thing I think has been overdone in sequels. So
does this mean we're going inside the orphanage? Don't answer. Don't answer yet. You have to come back and tell me all about it.
I have plans. Just really loose plans. Probably right now, this one is much more, at least in this current state, figuring out what it's about as I'm writing it. But I do need to sit down, because right now it's fairly easy. It's just, it's starting off with Isaac hey, can I do a teaser read? Do we have time?
Do it. Yes, do it.
All I'm going to read is the first paragraph. All right, here goes. His dead mother hadn't reached out to him in years. He wasn't even certain if she was trying to communicate with him in that moment. A draft came through the rattly windowsill above him. He shivered in his restlessness. Early March was doing its best to hang on to the parting spirit of winter. A steady wind rattled the pane. In the raw fog of a hangover, he'd heard his mother say his name imploringly, but he'd been dozing off and on for the last hour and couldn't be sure. Her voice could have just as easily come from a waking dream. She'd sounded raspy, and he'd only truly known it to be her because she called him by his name. Calling herself Mom, she'd said something about your father, something about checking in on. Through the dull throb of a headache and the discomfort of a sour stomach, Carson Fletcher focused on the soft din of voices that were always in his mind, like tinnitus. If he didn't pay any attention, he largely didn't hear them. If he drank, he didn't hear them at all. Very few were ever speaking directly to him, but he picked up bits and pieces of their obscure murmurings, as though his mind were a radio and someone were spinning the tuner endlessly through the station frequencies.
All right, I'm already in. So when it's done, you gotta let me know, and I'll be the first one to buy it. So,
absolutely, yeah.
So it's fantastic.
Well, I'm glad that you're the first person that I've read that paragraph aloud to.
I mean, that is a great opening line too. It doesn't get much better than that. There's one other book that I've read in, I don't know, 3 years in this podcast that had a great opening line. It was the very first interview I ever did. It's called The September House with Carissa Orlando. And the very first line is, "The walls of the house are bleeding again." And I was like, I'm in. I was in from the get-go. So.
And what a great title, The September House.
Yeah.
That's
I highly recommend it if you want a book to read to kind of separate from a little bit. It's a great book. It's a great read. It's obviously about a haunted house, but it's a different point of view than what you're probably expecting, and I just love where she went with it. So it's really great.
Cool. All right.
So. Well, the book is called Blood of the Witness Tree. It is available everywhere now. And so, Jeff, please tell everybody where they can find you on social and online.
I have been making an exodus from that, which is probably a bad choice as a writer, but I am only on Bluesky and LinkedIn thus far. I've kind of backed off from Facebook, Twitter, just because they're not good for my mental health, which probably makes marketing the book difficult. But I do, and I see you on there. I think right now Bluesky is probably one of the most welcoming spaces, and yet even within the last 6 months, it has deteriorated a bit because it's just the nature of social media. Nefarious forces get on there with negativity and whatnot, but that's where I can be found on the socials. And I think Bluesky, I'm literally like at Jeff Vande Zande or something like that.
I'll put those up on the screen for the video version, and they'll be in the show notes as well. And I agree. I got rid of my Twitter account about a year ago. I am mostly on Bluesky, and I do find myself every couple months having to What I love about Bluesky is you can create feeds.
Right.
And so I find myself recurating feeds because they do tend to get a little infested, and I try to weed out certain things. And so, like, if you look at all my different feeds, I've got all these over here to the left that I don't even look at anymore because I keep just moving them one over. Like, go away, I don't do this
anymore. Gotcha.
Yeah,
I check it out for news. I mean, it's to have that kind of topical of the moment news. I look at but I don't know. I hope it becomes a thing with the young people too, just an abandoning of all this technology, getting back to the visceral, getting back to the real world. That's, like, as I said, one of the true beauties for me of the Pigeon River Forest is when I drive into it, about a mile in, my signal goes away. My phone becomes useless. I can't call anybody, and more importantly, I can't look at the internet on it. And I think we need to live like that more often.
I would probably struggle for about a day and a half, and then something happens and you kind of like that goes away for me, and I'm like, oh, there have been times I've been on trips up in the mountains that don't have a signal, and the first day is a struggle, but then by the third day I'm like, I'm actually kind of really enjoying this, so it's kind of nice.
You get back into like ritual, like the ritual of making a meal even becomes, and the ritual of trying to use as few dishes as possible and finding a way to wash what, everything that you have with you becomes more significant. We have a life where we're so surrounded by things that nothing is significant. And yeah, there's something about bringing life closer to the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of just
That's right.
there's not enough of that. We live in the abstract too much, and I'm definitely desiring to get back to the concrete.
Agreed. All right, you guys, thank you so much. Van, thank you for hanging out with me again and talking about this great book that I obviously loved, hence the blurb that I was very happy to do, and I'm flattered that you asked. And we'll see you guys next time on Quills and Chills.